Rob DeMillo. Welcome to the Tech First Talks podcast.
Thanks, Charles. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
I got to admit, I'm really looking forward to this because normally on the podcast, I talk about topics that I relatively know at least a little bit, but today I'm going way out of my depth because we're going to talk about orbital data centers. So putting compute in space. So this is going to be a bit intimidating for me, but I'm hoping that you can educate me and the audience as well.
I hope I can as well, because that is my job.
Before we get into that, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your background? Because you've had quite an interesting career.
I had a long and winding road that led to the same place. My degrees are in computer science, mathematics, and weirdly astrophysics. And I had dreamed about becoming an astrophysicist until I realized that, I'd be eating ramen noodles for the rest of my life. So when I went to graduate school, it was computer science, heavy focus on math and analytics. And I left there to work for Jet Propulsion Labs. And I was an image specialist for the Galileo spacecraft, Mars Observer, God rest its soul. And to give you some idea of my age, the Soviet Venera spacecraft, if you remember those guys. So I did that for about 7 years and left there to go work at the FAA via Lincoln Laboratories. They're the folks that invented radar, and we were working on ATC problems, air traffic control problems. And basically doing the same work I was doing at JPL, but it was in the radar spectrum. And so we built terminal Doppler weather radar, which is now employed everywhere in the world. When that project completed, on time and under budget, by the way, when that project completed, they were going to put me on oceanic air travel, and I couldn't think of anything more boring. So one of the vendors that we were using was spinning out a startup company, and they asked me to go with them, and I did, and I never looked back. And I then began a 30-year career doing entrepreneurial work, and initially mostly in the media space, so media technologies. So video production, like this, right? So video production, video distribution, distribution channels, computer graphics for animation, computer graphics for special effects. And if you track that going forward, it leads pretty quickly into data centers when data centers started to show up. So the last 15 plus years of my career have been in and around data centers and how to do compute in those data centers in ways that made sense to get technology off-prem. The last company that I founded and sold was a company called Nimble Collective. And that was founded with a number of luminaries from the computer graphics world. So the folks that did Toy Story and Madagascar and Gollum from Lord of the Rings and those sorts of folks. And we took the animation platform, the animation workflow that animators use, and pushed it up into the cloud. The cloud was ready for it at that point. And the rationale behind it was that animators are a nomadic bunch. 2 years in New Zealand, 2 years in Toronto, 2 years in Los Angeles, that kind of thing. And it's hard. That's a hard life. So by putting the animation workflow into the cloud and allowing people to use the tools that they have always used in animation, you could live in Des Moines and work on the latest Avengers movie, right? And so successful, we sold that to Amazon, became part of Amazon's studio. I think that's called Amazon Nimble Studio now. And after that, I went to work for an architecture firm, which was way right turn left of field treatment, right? So the reason for that was when we were looking for partners for our animation platform, we were trying to figure out if we were going to be able to pay for our next meal. And so we were looking at other verticals. And it turns out that the workflow for architecture is extremely similar to the workflow for animation. So we started talking to architecture firms. And when we got bought by Amazon, I let the folks at one of the companies that we were talking to, which was Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, know that we were being sold. We'd be working with this nice guy named Eric. And they said, well, they called me back and they said, well, we've been looking for a CTO for 3 years. So I thought, okay, this is interesting. So I went over to SOM for about 5 years, and it was largely to do what I did in animation, but for architecture, moving their entire workflow up and into the cloud. SOM, like all large architecture firms, had offices all over the world. Everything was very centralized in each office. It was hard for them to communicate back and forth. So by pushing them in the cloud, it circumnavigated that problem. So I left there after 5 years. And my goal was to go into sort of a soft retirement. I was working with SparkLabs Global, as you know them as well, Charles. And then I got a call last summer from a group called the Mandala Space Venture Group. And Mandala Space Ventures, if you look them up, they are a accelerator for space tech companies. And it was founded by a guy named Dr. Leon Alkali. And Leon is ex-JPL. He is 32, 33-year JPL guy, ex-fellow, extremely well respected. He put the InSight lander on Mars, Grange orbiters around the moon, orbiters around Earth. He understood space tech back and forth. And so he left JPL specifically to start Mandala Space Ventures. And it's incubated a number of things, but one of the things that incubated was Sophia. So he called to talk to me about Sophia Space. They were doing a worldwide actually, I think, search for a CEO. And it turns out that if you do a Venn diagram of people who worked at JPL, people who understand data centers, and people who understand deep tech, it's like a tiny little dot in the center. So we talked for about 5 months. And in December, I agreed to come on board as CEO. In January, I took the position. We did a few tweaks to the business plan, and it immediately went out fundraising.
That's one hell of a journey. And we're going to come back to Sophia Space in a minute, but there's one more thing I'm dying to ask you about. You've been involved in 9 startups over the years, and 7 of those have exited. So you always hear about how hard it is to have an exit, yet you've managed a 7 out of 9 hit rate. So what's the key to your success?
Dumb, stupid luck. I wish I had a brilliant plan I could lay out for you, but yeah, honestly, it is a combination of skill and luck. If you over-index on one, you lose out on the other. I have always been interested, as is clear from Sophia Space, I have always been interested in that technology that takes you right up to the edge, that takes you right up to the hairy edge where you look over. And it is not for the risk averse, but it is the place where all the coins lie, right? So whenever you go to those edges, people want to do something. One of my startup companies was the first to do video advertising on a mobile device. One of my companies was the first to do cloud-based animation. So all this stuff where it's like the tech is almost there, just needs just a little bit of a shove and you go over. And what's interesting about Sophia is this has that all over. Like every green flag that's waving in my face about Sophia is this is that in truckloads.
You mentioned that you were talking to Sophia Space for a number of months because you were also contemplating a soft retirement.
Yeah, not to be that guy, but they called me when I was in Venice, Italy. And it was interesting because, if you look at my life as an Ouroboros, I did touch on all those areas and they were all incredibly fascinating. And I would be lying if I never thought about if you put a computer in orbit, what does that really mean? Like how does that all operate? How do you do interoperations? And it's kind of been noodling in the back of my head for a while. When Mandala called, when Leon called, I had the same reaction that a lot of people had until recently, which was, wait, what? That sort of moment. Okay, tell me more. I'm listening. And so we talked for a while. It was less about me convincing them to hire me as their CEO and more about let's talk to each other. Leon's a wonderful man, and we both wax poetic for a long time. You don't want to be on a phone call with either of us. So we had these really sort of interesting conversations that not only spanned what Sophia was doing, but just the philosophical and morality background of doing this kind of thing. It was a good fit and it made a lot of sense and it collected so many things in my brain.
It's an impressive twist because I remember seeing that you had left some and I thought you were just going to relax for a little bit. And instead you pop up as the CEO of an orbital data center company. And I'm like, how the hell did this actually happen? So why don't we talk a little bit about Sophia Space?
Sure. So let me talk a bit about the origin story because that's pretty interesting too. So Mandala Space, Leon's venture company, had a collaboration with Jet Propulsion Laboratories and Caltech. And by the way, that's going to be a common theme through this conversation. They got a big chunk of grant money behind this. Let's see if we can put up a solar cell in orbit and collect enough solar power and beam it down to Earth and see if we can do power collection that way. And so after 18 months, the results came back that, the math says yes, the economics say don't do this. They basically started to dismantle all that. And Leon, to his credit, he raised his hand and said, well, if we put a server on this thing. And so that was the origin story. So flash ahead to early 2025 and I come on board. The key to what we're doing here, and this is a differentiator for us, is we've rethought what it means to be a computer, right? We have a lot of competition and competition is great because it validates the market. And there's certainly enough to go around for everybody, right? But what we're doing that's different is we are not taking terrestrial servers, terrestrial technology, basically, and retrofitting it for orbit. We are not thinking about terrestrial data centers and how do you shove that whole thing up into space, right? We're going way back to first principles and saying, we're in orbit. There's radiation. The servers are moving. Energy is free. It's 4 degrees Kelvin in orbit. What can we do with all of this? And we came up with a device that we're calling a tile. And a tile it's an object that's 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 centimeter. It looks like a tile, and it does look cool. It looks that way for a reason. So it's a completely solid state device. It wouldn't even run on the planet. At the top of the tile is a solar cell that collects energy from the sun. And once you do the math, you wind up with about 450 watts of power. And in the center of this Oreo cookie is the compute layer. We have the equivalent of 4 enterprise servers on board, right? So think of them as quadrants in each tile. And the servers have been redesigned using off-the-shelf parts. We're not building anything special, but they've been redesigned to be flat, right? So that the heat profile is straight down onto the board. And then underneath that tile, compute layer, is a proprietary alloy that dissipates heat. And whenever you have a big delta between your heat source and the thing that you're radiating heat into, it's a lot more efficient, right? And so 4 degrees Kelvin, almost as cold as you're going to get. So now we've got this object that is a redesigned server. And if you were to run it on the Earth, it would overheat within minutes, right? It just flat out would stop. So it's got passive cooling. We get free energy, and you don't have the problems of real estate that you have here on Earth. The next trick is the operating system. So we've designed an operating system that sits on these tiles that becomes aware of other tiles it's attached to. So these tiles can be sort of infinitely stacked together. They communicate with each other back and forth, and they do the work that you would have an IT technician do in a data center, right? So they do load management, heat balancing. If one tile's too hot, one tile's too cold, it'll move processing over there. It'll look for errors. It'll correct in case of a dead tile. It'll run around the dead tile. Firmware upgrades, security patches, et cetera, et cetera. So now we have a system that is modular. Each tile understands everybody else. And at that point, you can start stacking these things together in different configurations. So that was a long explanation for one question. So apologies for that.
The first thing I want to go back to is you've got this great innovative technology that's totally cutting edge, and it's also new to market. So I know you just got some pre-seed funding, but now you have to go out there and identify the market demand and who should we be collaborating with or who should we be talking to. So where do you go from here? What are the next steps now that you've got the pre-seed funding?
We've been talking to people all along before we even started. So the pre-seed, we closed actually just about a month and a half, 2 months ago. And so thanks for bringing that up. And we're actually going back into a seed round raise almost right away because we're taking advantage of certain market conditions. With the proceeds from that pre-seed, we've hired hardware engineers, we've hired software engineers, we've set up a laboratory in Pasadena. We started the process of breadboarding the tile. So we're taking this out of the realm of math and CAD into reality to make those tiles. We plan on having completed demo tiles by the end of this year, and that we'll test the math by putting them into a chamber that will simulate orbital conditions, so light, radiation, blah blah blah. Make sure that the tile is operating the way it's supposed to work, and then next year we plan on launching a couple of demo tiles to test it in orbit. So that's the timeline going forward. As to how we are finding clients, once this all broke and went public, they're finding us. And there's some conversation around that too, right? So Department of Defense is obviously someone that's interested in us. We have a lot of collaboration with companies like Axiom, who are putting up their own station nodes. There are conversations like that are currently occurring, but what's happening in the world right now, so defense and weather and air traffic control and maritime management and all the rest of it, there's a concept called the LEO economy, and LEO stands for low Earth orbit. And low Earth orbit is anywhere between 200 kilometers and 1,000 or 1,200 kilometers. And in that layer, there's a lot of attempts at commerce happening. So there's infrastructures being set up. There are new satellites going up. There are new space stations going up. There are communications pipelines happening. So it's a little like watching, and this will appeal to you, it's a little like watching a smart city become built. We're building this new thing from scratch. So up we go, and we're going to somebody put in the plumbing. We're going to need somebody to put in electrics. So all this stuff is happening, and Sophia's going to be playing a part in that. Like, we are the compute for the LEO economy.
So how do you get these tiles into space? Because I know it's great once they're there, but it's not like you can just use a big slingshot.
Actually, there is a big slingshot, but that's not us. there is, what is it? Spin orbit? It's a good question. So there is a process we call origami, which is essentially what you're thinking of. So these tiles, they fold together, right? And so a large array of tiles can actually be made quite small. And once they're placed in orbit, they will self-configure, right? That's part of our portfolio, our patent portfolio. And so when they're released, they will simply expand. There's no on switch. When they get enough power, they will simply start up, boot, and go from there. As to how we get it in orbit, we have no plans whatsoever to become a launch company. There are a lot of folks out there doing a lot better work than we ever could. The SpaceX's and the Blue Origins showing up on the planet now to get people into orbit, which is the other key. The cost of getting an object into orbit per kilogram is dropping dramatically. It wasn't that long ago where it was in the $25,000, $30,000 US dollar per kilogram range, which is prohibitively expensive. It's now in the couple thousand range, and by 2030 it'll be under $1,200 a kilogram.
There's so many satellites in low Earth orbit right now. You've got Starlink, you've got companies and governments in the Middle East and Asia putting up their own networks, and many others. But aren't we going to get to a situation where there's just so much up there that the space junk is just going to clutter everything?
There's definitely a bunch of space junk up there, but there's a responsibility of the satellite owners to deorbit these things, which simply means exactly what it sounds like. It crashes into the Earth's atmosphere and burns up. I don't want to minimize this because it's a real problem, but you'll see in the press, there are these computer graphics that show like this shell around the Earth of crap, right? And all that stuff is subpixel, right? So when you go up 800 kilometers, your surface area expands tremendously, right? So it's not the surface area of the Earth, it's the diameter of the Earth plus 800 kilometers, right? So it's a larger area. Having said that, there is a lot of crap up there. There are a number of companies that are looking at removing debris from orbit because we were pretty careless for the first 40, 50 years of doing this. And so there's a lot of bolts and chips of paint and small objects flying around in that shell, which do pose a problem. And they pose a problem now, and they'll pose a problem for a while until there's a cleanup methodology adopted. And I've seen some fairly clever ideas for doing this. Satellites themselves, they have to be deorbited after a certain period of time. We've gotten better at making sure that we keep the debris levels down, but I don't want to minimize it. It is an issue, which is part of why the tile arrays, the operating system that runs those tile arrays, will route around dead tiles or dead quads in the tile because they probably will take a hit at some point.
I want to take this all the way back to the beginning. So I'm going to ask you some very simple questions to make sure that I and the audience understand this. So why would we put data centers in space at all?
The slight change to our business plan is we talk about this in terms of putting compute in orbit, which leads to an orbital data center. So the first few years of our existence, we are working specifically with edge computing around satellites and stations that need compute local, right? And I can talk about why they need that in a moment. But in a very short period of time, and we're talking in the 2030, 2031 timeframe, yes, we will be using these tile technologies to put up our own orbital data centers, which will operate like a data center. A 1 megawatt data center using our tile system is a small object. It's a 50 meter by 50 meter device, right? Which is half the size of the ISS, I think, if I remember my math. So the reasons that you want to get compute off the ground and the reason you want to get data centers, at least partially off the ground, is threefold. One is power. So power is free. When we put our orbital data centers in orbit, they'll be in something called a sun synchronous orbit, which you can think of as being pole to pole. They're mostly facing the sun almost all of the time. There's about 3 months a year where there's a few minutes a day where they go into eclipse, but these things have batteries, so they'll be fine. So power's free. Cooling's free. The thing that nobody talks about data centers on Earth, and the reason they don't talk about it is there's no real good solution because the laws of thermodynamics are real. They generate a lot of heat, and heat is energy, and you can't destroy energy. You can just move it, right? And so when you talk about a terrestrial data center, 40% of the power that goes into a terrestrial data center goes towards cooling. So you're either shipping the cooling to the Earth, to the atmosphere, or the ocean. Those are kind of your only choices. I mean, you could move it into oil, and then the oil becomes a contaminant problem. So you could have all the free energy on Earth that you want. People are talking about nuclear power centers near data centers. Sure, okay, but it still heats those things up, right? Which is definitely a local problem. If you think about the urban heat transfer problem, you've got that 20-fold with a data center, right? You've got this immense object the size of a warehouse, putting all this heat right into your local environment. And there's an argument to be made that if you think about that far enough down the road, you're going to help with global warming, right? So when you put these things in space, you don't have that. It's just gone. The heat goes into the biggest heat sink you can think of, which is the known universe, right? And so there's not really a heat problem. And then the third thing that goes away is NIMBY, right? Right. So we don't have anywhere near as many data centers as we want.
We should clarify this just in case. NIMBY stands for?
So not in my backyard, right?
Not in my backyard, yes.
Yeah. These buildings are, they've been made more and more attractive, but they're buildings. They're windowless giant buildings. Nobody wants them around. And so a fun fact here is that 30% of the United States' data centers are in Virginia. And Virginia said that's about enough of that, right? We don't have enough data centers. Nobody really wants them anywhere. And the projection is that by 2030, we'll have 3 times as many as we do now, right? So you don't have that problem in orbit either. So in one swipe, you get rid of all of this.
Okay, so now we can put compute in space. But what I want to know next is, what are the use cases? I know you mentioned defense, but what else could it be used for?
So we have amazing satellites up there right now, and more are planned, right? And these things have sensors that collect terabytes, sometimes petabytes of data. And the dirty little secret here is that most of that data is tossed out. And it's tossed out not because it's not good, but because the compute on the satellite is not powerful enough, or the bandwidth is not high speed or fast enough to get information down back to the planet to do the computing and have it go back up to the satellite. They do some quick high pass filtering, and 80 to 90% of the data is just tossed on the floor based off of this kind of rudimentary filter. So that's what's happening right now, and it's happening everywhere. But with edge computing right there, you don't need to do that, right? So suddenly things that were science fiction-y become possible. You can do real-time missile tracking. You can do real-time air traffic control. You can do real-time environmental management, environmental catastrophe management. You can do maritime work. You can do things that you could never really do before because you had to get the data from the data source down to the ground to do the compute and then send the results back up. And that time lag was often slow enough, sometimes hours, sometimes days, depending on the size of the data set, where you couldn't do anything in real time. Now you can.
I have an odd question about this one, though. So what's going on with air traffic control now? I mean, aren't we relatively safe as is?
It's going to add to their toolbox of things that they can do, right? Air traffic control right now is fairly well mapped out over most of the land, right? The United States and Europe and the Eurasian continent and Africa. But there are still data deserts, right? There are still points where the aircraft is not on any ground-based service. If you're doing oceanic air travel, you're going from Long Island to Heathrow. There are long stretches of period there where the only information that's coming to you is the plane's own radar system and delayed satellite information. This kind of goes away now. So now you've got objects in orbit that can do something called sensor fusion, right? And sensor fusion is, and you know this from your city work as well, sensor fusion is, okay, I've got a little bit of data here. I got a little bit of data from this sensor. I've got these images here. I've got this radar data here. I've got LiDAR here. Cool. Now what? Right. But now you've got this ability to take all that stuff and combine it together and come up with something more accurate.
It's taking data and turning it into intelligence. And it just clicked for me right there while you were explaining it. And the first thing I thought of was that missing Malaysian Airlines flight. And we didn't know where it was because it wasn't sending out any more pings.
That's right.
Okay, now I get that. So the final basic question is, this is so cutting edge. What's changed in the last few years that makes this even possible now?
Well, advances in computing, that has pushed chip technology pretty significantly. NVIDIA leading the pack, but there's a lot of folks that are getting involved in this. So the technology itself has improved. The ability of the operating systems to make intelligent decisions on its own based off of its own data, right, has improved. That's what's allowing our operating system to manage the tiles for itself. and launch cost dropping. That's one of the big ones. There's so much competition. Eric Schmidt just took the CEO helm at Relativity, and there's SpaceX, and Honda just got in the act, and Blue Origin, and there's dozens of smaller companies that are small lift companies to push things up into orbit. And there's so much competition, like anything else on the planet, competition has caused prices to plummet. All projections show that they're going to continue to plummet. So it's becoming cheaper now to put things up.
It's a good combination of factors, which makes it a very attractive market to go after. But how do you scale this? You mentioned that your tiles are going to be ready to go next year. Is this something that's going to be small at first and then grow incrementally?
It is the goal for these things to self-deploy, even the large ODCs that we're planning on in 2030, 2031. Because of the size of the tile and because of the way our origami tech works, they can be made quite small. And there are a lot of heavy lift rockets coming online. So in the 2030, 2031 timeframe, we feel confident that the carrying capacity of these rockets will carry up an entire 1 megawatt data center on its own, and it'll deploy. In the meantime, as we're putting up these smaller racks of tiles, they're small enough that they'll fit in current lift vehicles. Even when we get to the point of something that we're calling a satellite companion, which is not quite a data center, not quite a rack of tiles, it's small enough where it will fit in current launch vehicles.
I want to go a little bit more into the use cases. So we talked about air traffic control, and I understand that one. I also understand the defense side of it. But the one I want to go into now is the emergency responders. Is that more for disaster recovery?
Think of it this way. It's a variation of the ATC problem, right? So when you're on the ground, whether you're a foot soldier or you are a disaster response person, you have available to you what's coming in over your headset, what you see in front of you, what any sensors you have on your body collects, and whatever drone information is collected, right? And a lot of that is disassociated. And a lot of that is the response tactics are provided by people in a room somewhere that's collecting all this stuff and advising the people on the ground. Now, if you want to employ satellites to help with disaster recovery, people looking for heat signatures of people in a building or something along those lines, that information has to get relayed. But if you are in orbit with compute and you send all this information up, which is a lot smaller task than sending the information down because the data sets are small and can be sent to orbit fairly quickly, let the AI that's in those tiles coordinate that effort and then send accurate information back down. Now you've got a system where you know where somebody is under the rubble, or you understand where the enemy is over the next horizon, or you understand incoming missiles. You've got this situation where you can now coordinate all this stuff in a manner that makes sense.
The near-term use cases, and by near-term, I mean the next 5 to 10 years, sounds like they're a lot more defense, emergency response, and air traffic control related. But do you think this is going to evolve to where there'll be some commercial applications where enterprises will actually start to leverage this as well?
1,000%. 1,000%. Let's talk about orbital data centers. We don't assume at all that ODCs are going to replace terrestrial data centers, right? But they will absolutely augment terrestrial data centers. So the conversation is to work out collaborations with the hyperscalers, right? And we're having those conversations now. I've worked in data centers. I worked around data centers. I've worked with data centers as a client. User-facing instances in those cloud services, it's always problematic. We had a hard time at both SOM and Nimble getting enough instances ready for our clients in the morning because those servers are busy doing other things. And the other things they're doing are LLMs for artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency mining, rendering, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all this back-end processing stuff that doesn't need a user-facing component. So the conversation is just give that to us. Things that you don't need for several hours, just pass that up to us. We'll do that processing for you. We'll send you back the results. And then you can use those servers that you're tying up doing things that you don't need to be tied up doing for user-facing instances. So you get more clients in on your end. It's an interesting little addition to what's going on right now.
If only there was a company that was really big in data centers that was also involved in space launches.
Yeah, if only.
So when you look at how this industry is going to develop over the next 10 years, what do you think are going to be the big drivers behind it? Is it going to be the technology advancements, the prices coming down, or is it going to be a massive demand for these types of solutions?
Nature abhors a vacuum, right? So the more compute you provide and the more storage you provide, the more you'll need it, right? The best way to paraphrase it is we used to have these computers that had like 640K of memory, and people were writing compact code so it would run in 640K of memory. Now memory's not a problem, right? You've got computers with 32 gigs, 64 gigs regularly being shipped out, right? But what has happened is not that, oh, well, we've got more memory than we need. What has happened is we don't have enough memory. You're on a gaming computer with 64 gig, and you don't have enough memory. You don't have enough memory because these programs have expanded to take advantage of all that power that you've suddenly given them. That'll happen here, right? And so commercial applications will find the way, right? And if you suddenly tell them that, look, you can put up this for pennies on the dollar, you can put up this sensor in orbit that does a thing that you want to have done, or does long-term storage, or is doing high-intensity compute, and we'll give you the computers to do that, you're off to the races, right? And by the way, 5 tiles. So one tile generates, we're projecting about 450 TOPS of compute power. 5 of those tiles technically meet the definition of a supercomputer. And because they're networked together and because of the way they work, off you go, right? So now you've got this situation where you have unlimited computing. If you need more compute, you just launch more tiles and attach those on. And you can get access to it whenever you want. So what do you think is going to happen?
I think it's going to be fantastic. But let's look out 10 years, and let's say that the industry has completely taken off. What are the critical success factors along the way over this 5 to 10 year period? What needs to happen to make this market really get to the next level?
We got to get the operating system right. It is a project that will never end. We'll always be manipulating and making sure that it works, because you're not sending up a service tech to repair a tile or to move tiles around or what have you. The operating system on the tiles has to work out of the gate. And then as we move forward and we expand to new and different clientele and larger collections of tiles, the operating system has to be able to do the right thing to manage those tiles as though it was a person. Right. And so that's the tech that really needs to progress in our space. And then on the ground, it's keep the costs coming down. Let's get down to a couple $100 a kilogram, right? As those costs drop dramatically, and they are, we can start to do more and more ambitious things. We as a people, right? As a humanity, right? We can start to do more and more ambitious things if we can get into space easier.
This has been fascinating. And I love the fact that I feel like I actually have a decent understanding now of where this is at.
You're a smart guy, Charles. I've known you for a long time.
Yeah, but I'll be honest, I was struggling with what some of the use cases were going to be. And now I've got a better understanding of the defense side, air traffic side, as well as the emergency response side. And I also see how when these prices come down, how it actually doesn't replace an existing data center, it augments it. So these things are complementary. And let's face it, like we said, there's a couple companies who could benefit on both sides of having data centers and space launches. I want to close out by asking a few more fun questions, because you've got a breadth of experience over the years, especially on the startup side. So you've gone through this time and time again. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs or someone that's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur?
If you're risk averse, don't do this.
Yeah.
I don't mean that to be as a negative, but it does take a toll. You're always hustling for your next dollar, and you're always hustling to make your minimum viable product. And you're always hustling to catch up with the bigger players that have been around for a while. So you have to be internally prepared for that. The positive side of that, or if you want to call it a positive side, is it becomes very addictive. So when I left government work and I moved into entrepreneurial work, first of all, it was a culture shock. Once you got into the groove, you really can't stop. It really feels like, it's like eating another peanut. And I was semi-retired. I was out. And when you're out, they reach and they pull you back in. It tickles a part of the brain that maybe you didn't know that you had, right? So the intellectual curiosity, the business side of it, the maneuverability of it, the knowing when to hit the gas and when to quit, right? All of that stuff that is dormant in your lizard hindbrain comes up. So the best advice I have for people who are doing this stuff is, if you want to do this, you should do this. And if you have any hesitation at all, the world is a big place. Yeah, there's a lot of very interesting things that you could do.
The next question is how you keep yourself motivated during this process. You mentioned you're going to be doing some demos in 2026. You're not really going to deploy until 2027. but you're looking at some longer development cycles. So along this journey, what keeps you motivated day to day? Is it the intellectual challenge of it?
That's part of it. It's also shorter than you think. We're talking about putting up a data center in, 6 years, right? That's a short time frame. And when I worked at JPL the first time around, mission life cycles were 20 plus years, right? Like I said, I was the image processing specialist on Galileo. I never saw those images delivered. I only worked on test data because I left before Galileo completed its mission. People stay at those positions for years, right? And rewardingly so. But the concept of going from a 20-year project cycle to a few years is incredibly compressed. And that in and of itself is the intellectual challenge for me personally.
It's good to keep things in perspective. 5, 6 years sounds like a long time, but I think 5 years ago, we were in the middle of a pandemic. The final question is, what should we be looking to see from Sophia Space in the next 12 to 18 months?
Demos. So in orbit demos next year, and then activating one of our collaborations for 2027. So we'll be putting up tiles/tile satellites that are doing the work that is required by our collaborator. So you'll see that. And then near the end of 2027, you're going to see us doing production facilities. So the interesting thing to keep in mind here, and the thing that separates us from our brethren at JPL, is that we're not building a special purpose device. We're Dell Computer in space. So basically, we're building computers. And you and I have a good friend that built a business in data centers in Asia. And I was talking to him about this, and he's like, you can't be in a better business than making the machine itself, right? Yeah. And so we'll be rolling these things off an assembly line, the same way that you roll out servers off an assembly line, and being sold to clients and giving them all the tools to make it work the way that they need it to work. Here's your computers, go crazy. So we're not building special purpose devices. We're not building something to look for life on Europa. We're not building something to wander the surface of Mars. We're not building a thing to do a thing. We're building computers. And so once you start hearing that we are selling these tiles, which would be in the late 2027, early 2028 timeframe, that's when you know things are changing.
And the second part of the final question is, what about you personally? What are you most looking forward to in the next 12 to 18 months?
Oh yeah, lighting these things up. This business, as well as every other business I've ever been in, because I'm always on that edge looking over, there are the naysayers. You can't do this for blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we know. Like, look, we're not idiots. Yeah. We know about all that stuff. And getting to that point of turning this thing on, getting the first blip, that's going to be satisfying not only from a business and commercial milestone and an intellectual and commercial milestone, but from a personal, told you, milestone. So all that stuff I'm looking extremely forward to.
I love it. The whole thing you're most looking forward to is the I told you so moment. And I don't blame you, because when you're at the forefront of technology and trying to change people's perspective or preconceived notions on a topic, the best thing at the end is like, I knew it was going to work all along.
It's the best feeling. And it's happened several times in my career, and it's great. So
Rob, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today. This has been absolutely fascinating. And thanks for being so patient with my very naive questions, because I'm not an expert.
Oh, please.
I feel like I think I might start.
No. And neither you nor your listeners nor 90% of the people out there, it's once you grasp that it is a computer in space, it all makes complete sense.
Rob, I wish you all the best, and hopefully you'll keep us updated on your journey and the progress, and hopefully we'll catch up for a drink pretty soon.
That would be tremendous.